By the summer of 1943, the war had already turned against Nazi Germany, even if that reality had not yet been admitted publicly in Berlin. It was at this moment that a small Turkish military delegation arrived in the Reich, not as allies, not as enemies, but as observers. At its head was Cemil Cahit Toydemir, one of the most senior and experienced officers in the Turkish army. Toydemir was no naive visitor. Born in 1883, he had fought in the Balkan Wars, the First World War, and the Greco-Turkish War. He understood modern warfare, logistics, morale, and, perhaps more importantly, the difference between appearances and reality. What he saw in Germany and what he later reported to Ankara would confirm that Turkey's decision to remain neutral was not only prudent, but absolutely necessary. In June 1943, Nazi Germany was fighting on multiple fronts. Nazi Germany had suffered two major military defeats at Stalingrad and in North Africa. In the east, thanks to Manstein's counteroffensives, there was now a stalemate situation, and that might have lasted had Hitler not decided to launch Operation Citadel, the Battle of Kursk. However, in the west, the situation was completely different. The Western Allies were now winning. 250,000 Axis prisoners had been taken in Tunis, and they were clearly about to attack somewhere in the Mediterranean. Allied air power was increasingly destructive. Hamburg was about to be destroyed. The Atlantic Wall, still incomplete, was being presented as an impenetrable shield more for political effect than for military certainty. Turkey mattered enormously to Berlin. Control of the straits, access to raw materials, which Albert Speer was to outline in his book Inside the Third Reich, and strategic positioning between Europe, the Middle East and the Soviet Union made Ankara a prize that both Axis and Allies sought to influence, particularly given the change of fortunes in North Africa. The invitation extended to Toydemir was part diplomacy, part propaganda, and part intelligence gathering. The Germans hoped to impress. Toydemir intended to observe. The visit was deliberately kept out of the Turkish press. Toydemir left Istanbul dressed as a civilian, accompanied by a small group of senior officers and intelligence specialists. From Vienna onward, the delegation travelled by aircraft provided by Hitler's headquarters. Uniforms were only now issued. Movements were tightly choreographed. They were shown what the Germans wanted them to see: fortifications on the Atlantic coast, sectors of the Eastern Front, and selected units presented as evidence of continued strength. We can see him in photographs of Erich von Manstein taken before the Battle of Kursk. This photograph, with the date later placed on it, shows the inspection of a Tiger tank near Belgorod in the days before the Kursk offensive began. He's also seen with Werner Kempf, head of Army Detachment Kempf, an army-sized formation part of Army Group South during Operation Citadel, the German attempt to cut off the Kursk salient and destroy a large part of the Soviet army. The photograph was taken just before this battle. But even a managed tour cannot fully conceal exhaustion. Toydemir noted the age of the soldiers first. Many were barely 16, others were clearly worn down by years of continuous fighting. Equipment was present, but manpower quality was declining. This was no longer the confident army of 1939, 1940, or even 1941. The centerpiece of the visit was Toydemir's meeting with Adolf Hitler, attended by senior figures including Wilhelm Keitel and Alfred Jodl. Here we can see them at Rastenburg. The tone of the encounter was revealing. Hitler spoke at length and unusually candidly. He admitted that Germany had miscalculated before entering the war. The one factor he openly acknowledged as a surprise was the Soviet Union, its manpower, its industrial depth, and its ability to absorb losses on a scale Nazi Germany could not match indefinitely. He complained about exaggerated Soviet claims of German tank losses, yet in doing so, indirectly confirmed that attrition had become a serious problem. He spoke defensively about armoured warfare, logistics, terrain and weather, particularly the mud of the Eastern Front. These were not the words of a man confident of decisive victory. At one point, Hitler compared fortifications in France with Turkey's own defensive line at Citadel, implicitly acknowledging Turkish military competence. He asked about Turkey's economy, transport difficulties and internal pressures. The subtext was unmistakable. Germany was no longer dictating terms, it was sounding out limits. Before the meeting ended, Hitler asked Toydemir to convey his personal greetings to President İsmet İnönü. It was a gesture of respect, but also of necessity. Toydemir submitted a confidential report to İnönü shortly after returning to Ankara. The document was never intended for public consumption, and it shows. Its conclusions were sober. Nazi Germany, he believed, was fighting on borrowed time. The army was tired. Youth and quantity were replacing experience and quality. Hitler himself no longer projected certainty. More importantly, Toydemir concluded that Nazi Germany feared the Turkish army and had no desire to open another front. Turkey's neutrality, he argued, was not a sign of weakness, it was a sign of strength. Privately, Toydemir told his family something even more blunt. Nazi Germany was going to lose the war. German diplomatic cables, particularly those sent by Ambassador Franz von Papen, painted a different picture. Berlin chose to interpret the visit as a success. The delegation had been impressed. The propaganda aim, Papen argued, had been achieved, but this was complete self-deception. Toydemir had not been persuaded. He had been confirmed in his judgment. What Berlin interpreted as admiration was in reality professional courtesy masking strategic distance. Toydemir's journey matters because it offers a rare neutral perspective from inside Hitler's war machine at a critical moment. Unlike later memoirs or post-war testimony, his assessment was written while the outcome was still undecided, yet already visible to a trained military eye. By mid-1943, those willing to look closely could see the limits of German power. Toydemir looked, and Ankara listened. Turkey stayed out of the war, and Nazi Germany was about to lose it. History would show that the Turkish decision was absolutely correct. A lot of details about the visit are still secret in Turkey, but when declassified, I suspect we will learn a lot more about the state of the German military in the summer of 1943. Thank you very much for listening to this. I upload every day at 2000 hours Central European time. That's my time because I live in Poland and in Germany. I also offer channel membership. Channel membership includes access to more than 800 members only videos, and that costs €6, $6 or £5, and also it's available in other currencies as well. For the moment, from me, thanks for listening. Bye for now.